In this video, I'll walk through 3 of the 7 data page templates available in the ASP Web Matrix application. For each template, I'll start off by showing you the output of the template, and then I'll walk through the HTML and then the C# code that's used to generate the reports. The first thing I'm going to do is click the new file icon on the toolbar. Then I'm going to select Data Pages, and I'm going to start with the simple data report. This is the easiest of the templates. I'm going to browse and save this in a new location. Create a new folder and call it Data Reports. And I'll rename this file to Simple Data Report. And click OK. The first thing I want to do is run this example so we can take a look at the output. I'm going to go to View and Start. And I'm going to go ahead and run this in the Web Matrix web server. So I'll just click Start here. And I need to resize my browser. Okay. Now you see that the output from this report is just a very simple data grid. 5 columns, first name, last name, address, city, and state. There's a title. And it basically just binds the entire result set. So let me close the browser down and we can take a look at the code that created this. The first thing I want to do is look at the HTML portion of the code. So I'm going to click on the HTML tab. And I'm going to go ahead and move the toolbox out of the way so we can see a little bit more of the code. You'll notice there's nothing fancy about this. It's just a title, an ASP data grid. And if you look, there's nothing but formatting things being specified in the attributes. So let's go over to the code, because that's where the action really is in this example. Try to move that window out of the way a bit. You'll see the first thing that happens in the page load event is we create a connection string. So it's a string variable that just contains the connection string to a local instance of the pubs database. It's just using Windows authentication in this example. And the next thing is a string variable that contains the command text. So it just does exactly what you'd expect. It's going to select the last name, the first name, the address, and the city and state from the authors table in the pubs database. The next thing that happens is a SQL connection object is created by using the command text in the connection string. And from there, a SQL command object is created, and then the connection is opened. And then we're going to call the execute reader method on the SQL command object. That's going to return a SQL data reader. We're specifying the command behavior to be close connection. So basically what that's saying is that when the data reader is done and you close it, go ahead and close the connection to the database. And then we call the data bind method on the data grid, and that causes all the HTML to be rendered. The next template I want to look at is the filtered data report. I'm going to close this one. Go ahead and save my changes, and then click on the new file, Data Pages, and Filter Data Report. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the same directory, and I just need to rename the file, and we'll call it Filtered Data Report. Click OK. And just like the last one, I want to go ahead and run the example so you can see what the output looks like. So I'll go up to View and Start. And you'll see that by default, nothing is shown in the grid, nothing was selected. The default option in the drop-down box is all authors, so if you click on Show Titles, it's going to bind a data grid with all the authors in it. We can filter the report by selecting an author's last name and Show Titles. This will just simply bind a smaller data grid that contains all of the titles that that particular author wrote. Let me go ahead and close this and we can take a look at the code. Let's look at the HTML first. You'll see that you just have a heading. There's a drop-down list, a button, and a data grid. And we'll scroll over here and you'll notice that once again there's nothing fancy about the attributes that are specified in the data grid. It's all just formatting at this point. The one thing that we do need to point out is that in the button control we specified an on-click event. We're going to call the event applyFilter_click. So we'll take a look at that event in a minute. Let me go ahead and switch to the code view. And the first thing we'll look at here is the page load event. This template starts off by using the page.isPostBack property. We're going to put all the logic for filling the drop-down box in here so that it doesn't get filled every time the page is loaded. By using the isPostBack property, it's only going to happen the first time the page is loaded, and not every time a button is clicked or an event is fired on the page. So you'll notice that the first two lines look very similar to the last example. We're going to start off with a connection string to the pubs database, and then we're going to start off with some command text. So it's just a simple select statement. We're going to select the author's last name from the authors table. Then it's going to create a SQL command object and a SQL connection object. And then in the drop-down list, we're going to specify a data text field as AU_LName. So that's basically telling it, from the results that you get, I want you to display the field called AU_LName. That corresponds to the author's last name. The next thing that happens is the connection is opened. The data source for the drop-down list is specified as a data reader that gets returned by the executeReader method on the SQL command object. Once again, we're going to use the close connection command behavior so that when the data reader is closed, the connection to the database will be dropped. We're going to call the dataBind method on the drop-down list. And finally, we're going to insert one last row. We're going to put it in the position 0 as specified here, and we're just going to insert this text here, all authors, with some dashes. That way, that'll be the first thing that shows up in the drop-down list. Now let's take a look at the applyFilter_click method. This is the event that fires when a user clicks the button. So you'll notice that once again, the first thing we're going to do is create a connection string variable. We're going to pass in the text that's needed to connect to a local instance of the pubs database. And then we're going to create an empty string variable called command text. And we're not going to give it a value yet because we're going to give it a value based on whatever the user selects in the drop-down box. So the next thing that we do is create a string variable called filterValue, and we're going to pull that out of the drop-down list. Whatever item is selected, we're going to take the text from that item, and then we're going to use the replace method on the string class to replace all single quotes with with double quotes so that SQL Server doesn't puke. The next thing that happens is the command text variable is filled depending on the value of filterValue. If the first item or all authors is selected, we're just going to do a simple select. We're going to select the title, price, and the year-to-date sales from a view called Title View. If any other value is selected, or rather specified in the drop-down list in this filterValue variable, we're going to specify the same title, price, and year-to-date sales from titles, but we're going to use a where clause and filter based on the value of that filter, which is going to correspond to an author's last name. From there, a SQL connection and a SQL command object are created. The connection object is opened. The data source is specified as being, of course, a data reader coming from the executeReader method on the SQL command object. And then dataBind is called. So that's going to bind really the same data grid with two different result sets depending on what the filter value is. So it's really a pretty easy way to create a filtered report. Let me go ahead and close this and we can move on to the next template. Save changes. Click on the new file icon, data pages. I want to move down to the simple stored procedure. Let me go ahead and put this in the same spot. We'll name it simple stored proc and click OK. Now we'll go ahead and run this, and I want to point something out real quick. View start. This should look very similar to the first example. It's just a title, a horizontal rule, and then a little data grid. Got 5 columns, just a product name, a price, quantity, a discount, and then an extended price. So it's just a simple data grid example again, but obviously based on the name of it, we're going to use a stored procedure instead of just embedded SQL. So once again, let's take a look at the HTML code first. And you'll notice that there's nothing fancy here. It's just a data grid. There's nothing being specified except for formatting. Let's go ahead and switch over to the code view, and we'll take a look at the page load event, since that's where everything happens. You'll see that we're going to create the same connection string. We're going to create command text, but instead of specifying an entire SQL statement here, we're going to specify the name of a stored procedure called cust_order_detail. From here, we're going to go on and create a SQL connection object and a SQL command object. The connection object and the command object are created the same way the initial example was. And then we're going to create one more object called SQL parameter. After specifying that the command type is going to be stored procedure instead of text, we're going to fill the parameters collection with a new parameter, and it's going to be used to specify an order ID. In this example, they've just hard-coded it into the page, but you could easily turn this into a filtered report, just like the last example, by creating a drop-down box and binding a list of order IDs. Then you could just simply fill in the value here instead of hard-coding the number in. From here, we're going to open the connection just like in the other examples. We're going to execute the SQL command objects, execute reader method, and then we're going to call the data bind method. So it's a very simple example, just like the simple data report was. That's all there is to the first 3 data page templates I wanted to walk through in this video. And the next one, I'll finish off the series by walking through the remaining 4. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the videos.